The air in the special subspace arena crackles with the nervous energy of hundreds of elite students preparing for the Hawakan Academy entrance exam. Armored teenagers with glowing legendary swords and massive enchanted spears look down on the black-haired boy who seems to have brought nothing but a cooking utensil. Kang Gama ignores their jeers, his mind drifting back to his previous life as a master sashimi chef who lived and died by the edge of a thin blade. Suddenly, the exam proctor announces the start of the battle royale, and the subspace barriers drop as chaos erupts across the battlefield. A burly student in full-plate armor charges toward Gama, swinging a massive war axe with the intent to crush the weakest target first. With a movement so fluid it appears as a mere blur, Gama reaches into his bag and draws a cheap discount sashimi knife. The sword god blessing activates instantly, surging through Gama's arm as the short blade begins to hum with divine energy. In a single horizontal stroke, the kitchen knife slices through the heavy plate armor, as if it were soft butter, severing the attacker's weapon mid-swing. The armored student screams as he falls, his life force in the subspace drained instantly by a single strike from a rankless blade. High above in the observer's lounge, the Academy's instructors stand up in disbelief, their eyes glued to the monitor, showing the special admission student. Among them is the Sword Emperor, Siegfried von Nibelung, who narrows his eyes as he senses a terrifyingly refined aura coming from the boy's movements. 3 more students coordinate an ambush, launching elemental magic and long-range projectiles at Gamma from different angles. Gamma dances through the barrage with the grace of a chef navigating a busy kitchen, parrying every projectile with micro-movements of his knife. Within seconds, he closes the distance and eliminates all 3 opponents with surgical precision, leaving the arena in stunned silence. As the first round of the exam ends, Gamma sits on the ground, his body trembling from the sudden backlash of the divine power he hasn't yet mastered. He remembers the system notification that appeared when he first arrived in this world, claiming he was the god of the short blade. All he wanted was a quiet, ordinary life, yet his own talent seems determined to thrust him into the spotlight of this hero-obsessed world. A pair of arrogant brothers, the Mao twins, approach Gamma, their hands glowing with brutal fist augmentation magic. They have been slaughtering weaker students for fun, and now they see the exhausted boy with the kitchen knife as their next toy. Gamma notices a girl shivering in the corner, a target of the twins' malice, and his sense of justice begins to override his desire for a low profile. He reaches for his second knife, activating the painless blessing to temporarily nullify the agony that comes with his true power. The twins charge simultaneously, their heavy footsteps shattering the arena floor with every stride. Gamma disappears, moving at speeds the human eye can't track, appearing between the 2 brothers in a heartbeat. With 2 simultaneous slashes, he severs the magic gauntlets from their arms, the blades passing through the artifacts as if they didn't exist. The twins collapse in shock, realization dawning on them that they have just encountered a monster masquerading as a commoner. Gamma doesn't say a word, simply walking past them to the girl he saved, offering a hand to help her up. The girl Chloe stares at him with a mix of awe and a strange hidden intensity that Gamma fails to notice. Suddenly, the timer for his painless blessing runs out, and the full weight of the divine backlash hits Gamma's nervous system all at once. He loses consciousness as the medical drones descend, his last sight being the stunned faces of the Star Class students. Days later, Gamma wakes up in a high-tech recovery ward, greeted by the smell of antiseptic and the hum of mana-regenerating machines. He is shocked to find the Academy Director, Medadia Poison, and the Sword Emperor himself sitting at his bedside. They reveal that he scored the highest points in the history of the entrance exam, even beating the Sword Emperor's own granddaughter. Gamma immediately asks to be placed in a lower class, still desperately clinging to his dream of a safe and ordinary school life. Medadia laughs at his request, agreeing to place him in the Wolf class instead of the elite Star class as a compromise. However, Siegfried warns him that a tiger cannot hide among sheep for long, and his power will eventually attract dangerous attention. On his first day of school, Gamma walks into the Wolf class, noticing that he is the only student with black hair in a sea of colorful nobles. He spots Chloe, the girl he saved, sitting in the front row, her eyes widening as she sees him enter. The training begins immediately, and Gamma struggles to keep his strength hidden while performing basic physical exercises with his classmates. He senses a presence watching him from the shadows of the training hall balcony, a gaze filled with cold calculation. Far away in the demon realm, a high-ranking Legion commander stares at a blood-red pool, seeing a vision of a boy holding a kitchen knife. The commander whispers a name that hasn't been spoken in centuries, as a dark omen begins to spread across the sky over Hawakan Academy. The dark omen in the sky lingered like a stain over the pristine spires of Hawakan Academy. Kangama sighed as he wiped the sweat from his brow, wishing the strange prophecies would just leave him alone. All he wanted was a simple dormitory kitchen and a steady supply of fresh fish to practice his craft. The next morning, the class placement trials were announced, sending a wave of anxiety through the freshman ranks. Students whispered about the rumored difficulty of this year's combat evaluation. Gama stood at the back of the crowd, his hands tucked into his pockets while others polished their broadswords. A group of upper-class students laughed at the sight of the kitchen boy entering a combat trial. He ignored them, focusing instead on the small, leather-bound wrap hidden beneath his blazer. The trial grounds were not a simple arena, but a sprawling, enchanted forest filled with lethal traps. The head instructor announced that only those who reached the center would be placed in the S-rank class. Chloe moved through the brush with practiced elegance, her staff glowing with a pale light. Suddenly, a series of explosive runes detonated, separating the students into isolated zones. Gama realized immediately that the trial had been tampered with by an outside force. A scream echoed from the clearing ahead, high-pitched and full of genuine fear. He sprinted through the undergrowth, his movements becoming a blur of unnatural speed. Chloe was cornered by 3 rogue automatons that were never meant to be part of the exam. These machines were designed for execution, their blades dripping with a corrosive black oil. Just as the lead machine lunged, Gamma dropped from the canopy like a falling star. He unsheathed a simple paring knife, its blade barely reaching 6 inches in length. The air around the blade shivered as the sword god blessing ignited the steel with blue fire. With a single fluid stroke, he carved through the reinforced neck of the first automaton. Chloe watched in stunned silence as the terrifying machine fell apart like a well-cut vegetable. The other 2 machines pivoted, their sensors locking onto this new high-threat target. Gama adjusted his grip, his thumb pressing against the spine of the blade in a chef's hold. He flickered out of existence, reappearing behind the robots in the blink of an eye. "Too much fat on these joints," he muttered, as the machines collapsed into dozens of neat cubes. He turned to Chloe and offered a hand, his expression returning to its usual boredom. Chloe took his hand, feeling a strange magnetic pull toward the boy she once dismissed. Hidden in the trees, a high-ranking student named Leon watched the entire exchange with narrowed eyes. Leon sensed that his position as the top freshman was suddenly under threat. Far away in the observation room, the academy elders watched the playback with growing hunger. They saw not a student, but a weapon that could shift the balance of the upcoming war. The trial continued, but the atmosphere had shifted from a test to a manhunt. Gama decided to escort Chloe to the finish line, knowing she wouldn't survive the next wave alone. They encountered another group of students who had been brutally defeated by a mysterious assassin. Gama realized the special admission he received was actually a death sentence intended to flush out his power. A figure draped in black robes stepped out from behind a waterfall, holding a cursed scythe. Gama didn't hesitate, drawing 2 knives this time and crossing them in a defensive stance. The clash that followed shook the very foundations of the forest, leveling trees for miles. As the smoke cleared, Gamma stood over the assassin, but he noticed a mark on the man's neck that matched the head instructor's seal. After rejecting the star class, Gamma settles into the wolf class, hoping for a life of quiet obscurity. However, his peace is immediately shattered when Chloe approaches him with a nervous, trembling gratitude. Gamma brushes her off, claiming his actions during the placement test were merely for his own survival. Deep inside, Chloe's mind begins to twist, her gratitude morphing into an obsessive, dark infatuation. The homeroom teacher, Lee Wanbin, barges in and announces a grueling physical training session. Gamma finds himself lagging behind the elite students, his current physical body far weaker than his chef's soul. Returning to his dorm, he chugs water and realizes he must grow stronger to withstand his own blessing. A knock at the door reveals Chloe, who invites him to a dinner she's prepared as a thank you. Gamma agrees, and they share a meal where he even helps her prepare sashimi with expert precision. His comfort vanishes when he accidentally discovers Chloe's diary, filled with his name written thousands of times. Chloe's expression turns blank and scary as she realizes Gamma has seen her private thoughts. She suddenly attacks with a real blade, forced into a yandere state by her traumatic assassin upbringing. Gamma grabs a box cutter to defend himself, activating a minor version of his sword god blessing. In a flash of movement, he suppresses her without injury, but the mental strain leaves him vomiting in pain later. He realizes the world of the game is far more dangerous than he anticipated, and he must prepare for war. To avoid the curse of his blessing, he decides he needs a weapon that is longer than 12 inches. While lost in thought, a voice interrupts him, belonging to the legendary Abel von Nibelung. Abel demands to know why he is sitting in her usual spot, her tone sharp and prideful. Gamma recognizes her as the game's main heroine, the one he spent so much money to obtain in his past life. He shuffles over to give her space, causing Abel to pout in unexpected frustration at his lack of awe. Abel notices the scars on Gamma's hands and realizes he is a fellow practitioner of the blade. She reveals her frustration at being the second-place scorer, unaware that the boy next to her is the one who beat her. Days pass, and the entire academy gathers to witness the arrival of the legendary transfer student. Leon van Reinhardt, the true hero, walks through the gates with a confident, blinding aura. Gamma watches from the shadows, knowing that Leon's arrival signals the start of the game's dark plot. Chloe reappears, acting cute and normal again, begging Gamma to let her train with him. He agrees to a sparring match using wooden swords to keep her dangerous assassin instincts in check. The spar begins, and Chloe's speed is overwhelming, forcing Gamma to use every ounce of his skill. Suddenly, Chloe strikes with such force that Gamma's wooden sword snaps in half. The broken blade, now shorter than 12 inches, triggers the sword god's blessing at full power. Gamma's personality is overwritten by the blessing, turning him into a cold, murderous fighting shell. Chloe realizes she has awakened a monster and tries to retreat, but Gamma is already behind her. He strikes with raw instinct, moving so fast that the air itself begins to scream. Chloe screams his name, her voice finally reaching the small fragment of humanity left in Gamma's mind. He stops the strike millimeters from her throat, his body trembling as he fights the blessing's control. After the blessing ends, Gamma collapses, realizing his power is not a gift but a parasitic curse. He spends 3 days in isolation, recovering from the horrific withdrawal symptoms of the sword god's power. When he finally returns to class, a single strand of his hair has turned pure white from the strain. In the hallway, he is confronted by Nox, Chloe's older brother and a master assassin of the Auditor family. Nox places a hand on his hilt and whispers that the elders have officially ordered Gamma's disappearance. The ominous threat from Nox hung in the air long after the confrontation in the academy hallways had ended. Despite the shadow of assassination looming over him, Kang Gamma focused his attention on the upcoming midterm examinations. The academy announced that the midterms would take place on the desolate and monster-infested Scopuli Island. Students were organized into small teams, and Gamma found himself grouped with the eccentric Chloe and the stoic Abel von Nibelung. The transport airship hummed with nervous energy as it descended toward the jagged cliffs of the island. Gamma noticed the shift in the atmosphere immediately upon landing, sensing a dense concentration of demonic energy. Almost instantly, a swarm of low-tier crab monsters erupted from the surf to challenge the students. Abel stepped forward, her massive shield glowing with a holy light that repelled the initial wave of beasts. Chloe moved like a blur, her rapier puncturing the weak points in the monster's carapaces with surgical precision. Gamma stayed back, occasionally flicking a small paring knife to finish off any creature that slipped past the front line. He was calculating the efficiency of their movements, realizing that the original game plot was already fraying at the edges. A sudden haunting melody drifted across the water, causing the surrounding students to freeze in a trance. Abel clutched her head as the siren song bypassed her mental defenses, her shield losing its holy radiance. From the depths of the cove, a massive demonoid mermaid rose, her scales shimmering with a toxic oily sheen. This was no ordinary midterm boss. It was a high-ranked demonoid that shouldn't have appeared for another 2 years in the timeline. The other students began to retreat in panic as the mermaid's song intensified, draining their mana. Abel tried to stand her ground, but the creature's massive tail slammed into the cliff, shattering the stone beneath her feet. The mermaid lunged forward, her claws extended to tear through the defenseless heroine. In a flash of blue light, Gamma appeared in the air, his sashimi knife already unsheathed. He utilized the sword god blessing, making his 12-inch blade feel like an extension of his own soul. The mermaid shrieked as Gamma's first strike sliced clean through her armored scales. Landing on the creature's back, Gamma moved with the fluid grace of a master chef, preparing a complex dish. He targeted the nerve clusters he knew resided beneath the mermaid's gills, striking with rhythmic precision. The demonoid mermaid tried to dive back into the water to drown her assailant, but Gamma's grip was ironclad. He unleashed a godly fillet technique, a flurry of hundreds of slashes that happened in a single second. The creature exploded into fragments of mana, unable to withstand the divine sharpness of the kitchen utensils. Gamma surfaced, gasping for air as he swam back toward the shore where his teammates watched in stunned silence. Abel approached him slowly, her eyes searching his face for any sign of the hidden power he just displayed. She asked him how a mere special admission student could solo a disaster-level threat. Gamma simply shrugged, claiming that he had just found a lucky opening in the monster's defenses. Chloe hugged Gamma's arm tightly, declaring that she knew he was her destined knight all along. Their moment of respite was cut short by a signal flare from the center of the island. The red flare indicated a code black emergency, meaning the academy professors were in trouble. Gamma realized that the anomaly wasn't just the mermaid, but a coordinated attack on the students. They moved through the thick jungle, avoiding more demonoids that seemed to be hunting for survivors. Gamma spotted a group of hooded figures performing a ritual in a clearing, surrounded by unconscious students. He recognized the insignia on their robes as the mark of the radical elder faction from the academy. He whispered a plan to Abel and Chloe, knowing they would have to act perfectly to save everyone. Just as they were about to strike, a cold presence appeared behind Gamma, freezing him in place. A voice rasped into his ear, asking why a mere chef was interfering in the business of the true masters of the world. Gamma froze as the raspy voice echoed in his ear, the cold breath of a stranger chilling his neck. He spun around instantly, his hand reflexively reaching for the small hilt hidden beneath his blazer. The space behind him was empty, leaving only the faint scent of ozone and old parchment. He knew the true masters of this world wouldn't stay hidden for long if he kept breaking their script. The next morning, a summons arrived at his dorm, bearing the heavy gold seal of the Sword Emperor. Siegfried waited in the center of the great training hall, his massive presence making the air feel thick. "They say a chef is outclassing my knights," the old emperor boomed, his voice shaking the pillars. Gamma stepped forward, the clicking of his shoes, the only sound against the heavy silence. "I only wish to cook and survive, Your Majesty," Gamma replied, bowing with practiced grace. Siegfried laughed, a sound like grinding stones, and drew his broadsword in a single, fluid motion. Without another word, the emperor lunged, his speed defying his massive size. Gamma didn't retreat. Instead, he stepped into the path of the strike, his kitchen knife appearing in his hand. The massive broadsword was parried by a blade barely 10 inches long, creating a deafening metallic ring. Siegfried's eyes widened as he felt the sheer density of the boy's spiritual pressure. "This isn't just physical strength," the emperor whispered. "You have entered the mental realm." Gamma's vision shifted, the world turning into a series of transparent lines and structural weaknesses. To him, the emperor wasn't a god, but a giant piece of tuna that needed a precise cut. He pivoted on his heel, his knife tracing a blue arc through the air that bypassed Siegfried's defense. Siegfried barely managed to manifest a mana shield, which shattered instantly upon contact with the kitchen tool. The emperor jumped back, a thin red line appearing on his ornate golden pauldron. "Wonderful. I haven't been forced to use my true domain in decades," Siegfried roared. Meanwhile, in a dark chamber deep beneath the academy, 3 hooded figures watched the duel through a crystal ball. "The variable is growing too strong," one of the elders hissed. "He will ruin the great design." They began to chant, weaving a curse designed to strike when the chef reached his most vulnerable moment. Back in the arena, Siegfried unleashed his Sun King's realm, turning the floor into a sea of molten light. Gamma closed his eyes, relying entirely on his chef's intuition to navigate the searing heat. He visualized the heat as a spice that needed to be balanced, moving through the flames with effortless steps. Siegfried swung his sword horizontally, a wave of energy capable of leveling a mountain heading for Gamma. Gamma raised his knife and performed a simple downward stroke, whispering the name of his technique, fillet. The mountain-level energy wave was split perfectly in two, passing harmlessly on either side of the boy. Siegfried leaned on his sword, breathing heavily, a look of pure respect on his face. "You are no mere chef, King Gamma. You are a master of the blade of the mind," the emperor declared. Gamma tucked his knife away, his hands trembling slightly from the exertion. "But beware," Siegfried added, his voice dropping to a low whisper. "Those who cannot control you will seek to destroy you." Gamma looked toward the elder's balcony, sensing a lingering malice that didn't belong to the emperor. Suddenly, the ground beneath him began to glow with a sickly purple light, the elder's curse taking hold. A sudden sharp pain lanced through his heart, making him collapse to one knee. Siegfried rushed forward, but a barrier of black glass rose to separate them. Shadows began to rise from the ground, taking the form of faceless assassins with jagged daggers. As the shadows closed in and his strength faded, Gamma realized this was not a test, but an execution. The cold shadows of the assassins retreated as the ground beneath Avalon Island began to tremble violently. A massive rift tore through the sky, spilling out a liquid darkness that extinguished the campfire's light. From the abyss emerged Malphas, a demon general whose presence alone crushed the spirit of the nearby students. Chloe and Leon fell to their knees, paralyzed by the sheer weight of the demon's bloodlust. Even the Sword Emperor Siegfried, weakened by the previous assassination attempt, struggled to lift his blade. Kangama stepped forward, his cheap sashimi knife held loosely at his side. Malphas laughed, a sound like grinding stones, as he looked down at the tiny human in his kitchen utensil. Gamma closed his eyes, focusing on the concept of cutting that he had mastered over 2 lifetimes. He realized that the length of the blade mattered not when the spirit itself was the edge. With a sudden roar, Malphas swung his obsidian greatsword, intending to cleave the island in 2. Gamma didn't dodge, instead meeting the mountain-sized strike with a simple upward flick of his wrist. The impact sent a shockwave that leveled the surrounding trees, yet Gamma remained unmoved. Frustrated, the demon general unleashed a barrage of dark magic projectiles that rained down like meteors. Gamma moved like a blur, his knife carving the spells into harmless wisps of smoke. Watching from the sidelines, Siegfried realized he was witnessing the birth of a new sword god. Gamma's internal mana began to resonate with the hidden ley lines of Avalon Island. A system message flickered in his mind, announcing the final evolution of his unique skill. His uniform shifted, turning into a celestial chef's robe that shimmered with starlight. "The world is but an ingredient," Gamma whispered, his voice echoing through the entire island. He reached out and grabbed the air, as if gripping the very fabric of reality. Malphas felt a primal fear he hadn't known in eons and tried to retreat back into the rift. Sectioning the void, Gamma announced as he executed a series of microscopic slashes. The space around the demon general was sliced into perfect cubes, trapping him in a spatial cage. Gamma took a final step, his knife now glowing with the brilliance of a supernova. He vanished and reappeared behind the demon in the blink of an eye. A split second later, Malphas disintegrated into millions of harmless particles of light. The dark rift collapsed and the oppressive weight on the island vanished instantly. Gamma's divine form faded, leaving him in his torn academy uniform once more. Chloe ran to him, tears streaming down her face as she pulled him into a fierce hug. Siegfried approached and bowed deeply, acknowledging Gamma not as a student, but as an equal. The remaining students cheered, their voices echoing the victory over the forces of darkness. In the days that followed, the corrupt elders were purged from the academy by Siegfried's hand. Gamma returned to his quiet life, though now he was the most respected chef in the history of the world. Leon and Abel frequently visited his stall, arguing over who got the last piece of sashimi. He looked at his small chipped knife and realized it had carried him further than any legendary sword ever could. The piece he had fought for was finally real, and the thread of the game's original plot was gone. Gamma knew that new challenges might arise, but he was ready to face them with his own 2 hands. He had found a family in this world, something he never had in his previous life. Taking a deep breath of the fresh island air, he felt a profound sense of belonging. With a final graceful movement, the godly chef sheathed his blade, his legendary journey now complete.